There are stories that leave a mark on your soul. This is one of them. It's a story about a child whose future was taken from her, not by fate, not by chance, but by the very people who should have fought for her. A child who had no reason to fear the world until she did. And the worst part? She tried to escape. She reached out for help, but no one came. This is the story of Emani Moss, of a little girl, forgotten by the people who were meant to care for her, and failed by the very system that should have protected her. You may think that things like this don't happen, but they do. The flames were already there, but they weren't enough. A man stood by a trash can, his hands shaking. A woman stood behind him, her expression unreadable. "We have to," she said. He looked down at what lay inside the can. His daughter, dead. For days her body had been left in the same room, slowly growing colder, stiffer. A child, his child, left to suffer. And now there was no turning back. She was only 10 years old, and starving, not from illness, not from poverty, but because her own family refused to feed her. For weeks, Emani had wasted away, trapped in a silent hell while the rest of the family lived their lives. Her father saw it. He knew something was wrong, but still, he did nothing. And Tiffany Moss, the woman who should have been her protector, she wasn't just neglecting Emani, she was ensuring her silence would never be broken. What happens when those who should protect you become your worst nightmare? Stay with me, because the truth is far darker than you can imagine. But before we begin, I just want to take a moment to thank you, my incredible viewers and subscribers. Your likes, shares, and thoughtful comments don't just support this channel, they help keep these stories alive. If you're new here, welcome. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and become part of this growing community that believes every story deserves to be told, and no victim should ever be forgotten. Now, let's get into it. But to fully grasp the weight of this story, we must go back to where it all began. April 23, 2003. The day Emani Moss was born. A little girl with big brown eyes, full of promise, and a heart too pure for the world she was about to face. Emani was one of 5 children, but life dealt them a cruel hand. Her mother, overwhelmed by addiction, lost custody of her kids. One by one, the system took them from her, leaving only empty promises and silence. And then, as quickly as she had been part of Emani's life, she was gone. No phone calls, no visits, no letters, just a name on a birth certificate. It was just Emani and her father now, Emani Moss, a single dad trying to do his best. He wasn't perfect, but for a while, he was all she had, and for a while that was enough. But even Emani, doing what he could, couldn't do it all alone. There were 2 women in Emani's life who made sure she knew love, her grandmother Robin Moss and her Aunt Sharon. These were the women who stepped in when the world seemed too big for Emani, who made sure she felt seen and heard. Robin, in particular, was the safe place Emani always needed. She was the one who loved her like no one else could, the one who, years later, would beg for Emani's safety. But love, as it turns out, isn't always enough. Emani was bright, she was kind, she had that rare gift of making others feel comfortable just by being there. Teachers noticed her. She was the child who always sat with the lonely kids, made sure no one felt left out. Even the class bully couldn't escape her kindness. Emani made it her mission to befriend him. No one was too lost, too angry, or too broken to be loved by her. She had that thing some children have, the ability to fill a room with light. And for a while, she believed the world was as kind as she was. Sundays were always the same. Emani would take Emani to Freedom Christian Church. For a time, it was a safe place, a world beyond the one she lived in, a world where she could simply be a kid. But church wasn't just about faith. It's where Emani met Tiffany Moss. Tiffany seemed like everything Emani had hoped for. Steady, dependable, a teacher, someone who knew how to nurture, to guide. She wasn't loud or flashy. Tiffany was someone you could build a life with. She was juggling college and work, making something of herself. Emani, tired of doing it alone, was drawn to her. And soon, their friendship blossomed into something more. By early 2009, they were engaged. By July 2009, they were married. Tiffany, once just a church acquaintance, became a wife and stepmother in what seemed like an instant. Emani felt like he'd found the perfect partner. A woman with a good job, a degree, and a heart big enough to love a child who wasn't hers. This was it. Not just a wife, but a mother for Emani. Someone who would tuck her in, pack her lunch, cheer her on. But the cracks appeared sooner than expected. Tiffany's cruelty wasn't obvious at first. It didn't scream for attention. Instead, it was in the small, quiet ways she began to tighten her grip on their household. The way she corrected Emani more than comforted her. The way she controlled every little detail, from what time Emani went to bed to what she ate. Every choice Tiffany made felt more like a tightening noose. Emani saw it, but he didn't want to believe it. He convinced himself it was just part of the adjustment. He didn't realize that Tiffany wasn't just a stepmother. She was something much darker. And for Emani, this was just the beginning of a nightmare that would unfold in ways no one could have imagined. Imagine a child, terrified of a bad report card. A child who feared going home because the punishment wasn't just a lecture or a timeout. It was something worse. Something that could leave marks that couldn't easily be hidden. That child was Emani Moss. And that fear. It wasn't just anxiety. It was survival. Emani, her father, worked long hours, 2 jobs. He was barely home. That left Tiffany in charge. She decided what homework was done, what punishments were given. Emani noticed. But did he want to see? Not really. He wasn't ready to face the fact that his daughter was in danger. Admitting that would mean facing the truth about the person he'd married. And he wasn't there yet. Then came the report card. It was bad. The grades, the ones that didn't meet Tiffany's expectations, weren't just bad grades. They were a countdown to something far worse. Emani knew it. She didn't just worry, she was terrified. And when a 10-year-old child is scared to go home because of a report card, that's not just stress. That's survival. So she did what most kids wouldn't do. She spoke up. She walked into the school nurse's office, her heart racing, hands shaking. "I don't want to go home," she told the nurse. And just like that, the truth spilled out. She wasn't hit with a hand or a belt. No, it was worse. It was a curtain rod, repeatedly. Not once, but enough times to leave scabs, welts, deep bruises. Pain so deep it stayed hidden, until now. The school acted, fast. They called the police. They called Child Protective Services. And just like that, Tiffany was arrested. The very woman who should have protected her was now in handcuffs. But Tiffany didn't face the consequences she should have. She admitted it. She hit Emani 3 times with a leather belt. "Just a few taps," she said. Nothing more. And that was enough for the judge. Tiffany got 5 years of probation, a slap on the wrist, and she lost her job. But she was free to go back. Back to the same house. Back to the same life. During this time, Emani was sent to live with her grandmother, Robin. For 6 months, Emani thrived. Her grades skyrocketed. She was happy. She wasn't scared anymore. But when the time came for her to return to Emani, Robin fought to keep her. "She's better here. She's happy," she said. "Don't make her go back." But Emani? He refused. Why? Not because he didn't love Emani, but because of his pride, his house, his rules. So Emani went back. And with that, She stepped into the very nightmare she had escaped. And so began the cycle again. Emani had no choice but to run. It was 2012. She was just 9. No money, no phone, just fear. The kind of fear that makes a child run out the door and into the unknown. She went straight to the apartment office, hoping for help. She told them everything. Tiffany tied her up and shoved her under a cold shower. Soaked, shivering, terrified. The apartment staff did the right thing. They called the police. And when the officers arrived, they listened. But when they knocked on Tiffany and Eamon's door, what happened next? Tiffany denied it all. Eamon backed her up, said Emani was lying, making things up, causing trouble, and with no visible bruises to prove it, they let her go. Emani was sent right back home, back to the people she was running from. And that was her first lesson. Telling the truth doesn't always save you. The second time she ran, she didn't go to an adult. No. This time, she vanished. When the police found her, she was curled up, hiding in the bushes of a nearby apartment complex. No jacket, no shoes, just a child, trying to sleep outside because, in that moment, it was safer than the place she called home. A police officer asked her why she was out there, and again, Emani told the truth. Tiffany was mistreating her. But once again, the system failed her. Instead of protecting her, DFCS charged her for running away and violating curfew. A 10-year-old girl, with a record, a child begging for help gets punished. Why? Because the system was too focused on the rules she broke instead of what she was running from. From 2011 to 2013, the Moss family moved around Georgia. Emon was gone so often that Emani hardly saw him. They lived with relatives, they moved into their own place, and through it all, Tiffany had total control. Emani, completely isolated, had no one to turn to. The people who cared about her, Robin, Sharon, couldn't see her. She was cut off. Then came Mother's Day, 2013. Emon's sister, Sharon, invited the family over. Robin and Sharon noticed something was wrong. Emani's hair had been cut. When Robin asked Tiffany about it, Tiffany's response was chilling. If you act ugly, you'll look ugly. They also noticed that Emani had become more withdrawn, more timid, but still, Emani managed to keep up her good grades and positive attitude, at least in public. But behind closed doors, things were getting worse. After the 2012 to 2013 school year ended, Tiffany and Emon pulled Emani out of school, claiming they were homeschooling her. But there were no books, no lessons. It was just control. Now, with no school to go to, Emani had no way to reach out. She was completely isolated. No teachers, no classmates, no family. Tiffany had made sure of it. And the system? They didn't act. In August 2013, DFCS received an anonymous tip about Emani. Someone saw how thin she had become. They saw how frail and sick she looked. But did DFCS step in? No. They claimed they couldn't find the Moss family's current address. And just like that, they did nothing. No one came to save her. Emani Moss should have been just another joyful child, full of dreams and hope for a future she could shape. But by October 2013, she wasn't living anymore. She wasn't even surviving. She was simply existing, wasting away in the dark corners of a home where she was supposed to feel safe. Imagine a home where food fills the air. Tiffany, her stepmother, cooked meals for her own children, making sure they had all their meals, snacks, and treats. The smell of hot meals wafted through the house, but for Emani, there was nothing. Weeks passed with no food, no care, and the silence from her room spoke volumes. Her siblings, Tiffany's biological children, were healthy and full of life, laughing and playing, oblivious to the pain their older sister was enduring. Emani was ignored. She was invisible. Her body slowly shrank, and with each passing day, hunger gnawed deeper into her bones. Tiffany kept the others well fed. Meanwhile, Emani, trapped in her own bedroom, lay there, too weak to even protest. On a few occasions, Tiffany would snap pictures of the meals she'd made for her own children and text them to Emani. She even sent pictures of cookies she planned to bake. But all Emani could do was lay there, too weak to move, with the smell of food wafting through the walls, taunting her. This went on for weeks. The truth wasn't hard to see if anyone cared to look. Emani was wasting away, and Emani noticed. His daughter, once full of life, was now a shell of herself. Her skin stretched tightly over her bones, her once bright eyes dimming. Yet somehow, Emani convinced himself it was just a phase, a growth spurt maybe. He told himself she was fine. He couldn't face the truth. But on October 24, 2013, everything came crashing down. Emani walked into the house after a long day's work, and there she was. Emani, convulsing on the bathroom floor, her eyes rolling back in a seizure. She was unresponsive. And yet, instead of calling for help, Emani did nothing. He didn't dial 911. He didn't rush her to the hospital. Instead, he picked her up, carried her back to her bed, and left her there. Just like that. The next 4 days were torture for Emani. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She didn't even attempt to eat anymore. Her body had begun to shut down. Her organs were failing. She had nothing left. October 28, 2013. Emani took her last breath, and when Tiffany called Emani, she did so with no urgency, no emotion, just 2 words. She's gone. Emani didn't rush home. He didn't even leave work. He finished his shift, because in his mind it was already too late. But Tiffany, she wasn't grieving. She had no plans for mourning. Instead, she made plans to cover it all up. To her, Emani wasn't a child anymore. She was a problem, and Tiffany knew how to deal with problems. "We can't call the police," Tiffany said. "They'll take our kids." And just like that, Emani caved. No protests, no resistance. He listened. So they left Emani's body lying in the same bed where she had suffered in silence for the last days of her life. For days, life went on as usual in that house. Tiffany cooked for her children. Emani went to work. They acted like nothing happened, like Emani wasn't lying dead upstairs. October 31st, 2013. Halloween night. Other children were trick-or-treating, having fun, collecting candy. But Emani wasn't thinking about costumes or sweets. He was in Walmart buying a trash can, garbage bags, charcoal, and lighter fluid. This wasn't about giving Emani a proper goodbye. No, this was about erasing her. At home, they began the grim task. They stuffed Emani's small, frail body into the trash can. They tried to burn her, watched the flames lick at her skin. They waited for her to turn to ash. But after 5 minutes, they gave up. She wouldn't burn. They put out the flames and left her body sitting there, like a job that wasn't even finished. The next morning, November 1st, 2013, they loaded up the car. Tiffany in the front, Emani driving, and their 2 young children buckled up in the back seat. In the trunk, the trash can, with Emani's remains still inside. They drove around looking for a place to dispose of her. A quiet, secluded spot. Somewhere out of sight. Somewhere they could pretend this never happened. But no place felt safe enough. So they went back home. They parked, took the kids inside, and left Emani's body in that trash can outside as if it was just another piece of garbage. By November 2nd, 2013, Emani had reached a breaking point. He had been living with this secret for days, working, coming home to a wife who acted like nothing happened. But in the back of his mind, he knew. He knew his daughter's body was still sitting in that trash can. That morning, it broke him. He pulled aside a coworker, a man he'd known for years, and confessed everything: the hunger, the seizures, the body, the fire, the trash can. His coworker's reaction was simple: "You have to turn yourself in." For the first time in his life, someone pushed Emani to do the right thing. It was 4 a.m. when the phone rang. Emani, struggling with the weight of everything he had just been through, picks it up. The voice on the other end? The dispatcher's voice was calm, but his was anything but. "I need help," he says. "I don't want to live anymore." The dispatcher, sensing the gravity of his words, presses on. "Sir, what happened?" There's a long pause. The truth, what Emani had been trying to avoid for so long, finally spills out. "My daughter is gone." The moment Tiffany Moss hears that Emani has reached out for help, she knows what's coming. She doesn't hesitate. She grabs her kids, packs a bag. She drives straight to her mother's house. When she gets there, she passes her children to her mother. "Take them. They're coming for me," she says before running to change her clothes. And just like that, she's gone. But not for long. By the time she's settled at her mother's, the police are on their way. Tiffany Moss is arrested, and soon the search begins for Emani's daughter. The police arrive, and as they approach the trash can, their hearts sink. They lift the lid and are met with a scene so horrific, so unimaginable, that even the most seasoned detectives can't bring themselves to look at it. What they see is beyond recognition. Charred remains. A little girl whose life was violently and cruelly snuffed out, reduced to a pile of ash, barely visible through the burning remnants. This wasn't just a murder, it was an attempt to make a child disappear completely. But the fire didn't work. Justice would be coming for Emani, even if the flames failed to erase her. The trial began swiftly after the arrest, and when it came, Emani didn't fight it. He pled guilty to felony murder and concealing the death of his daughter. His sentence? Life in prison. No parole. He would sit in a cell for the rest of his life, haunted by the daughter he allowed to slip through his fingers. But Tiffany? Tiffany refused to admit her guilt. She turned down a plea deal that would have spared her life, choosing instead to represent herself in court. She was advised against it, but she believed in herself, trusting that God would guide her through it all. During the trial, she did nothing. No defense, no questions, no cross-examinations. She sat in silence while prosecutors unveiled the horrifying truth. The witnesses came forward. First, Sharon, Emani's aunt, who spoke about her niece's suffering. Then Robin, Emani's grandmother, who had fought for her to stay with her, only to have her pleas ignored. Emani himself testified, his conflicting statements shedding light on his inability to see what was right in front of him. The most chilling testimony came from the medical examiner who showed the court Emani's frail, lifeless body, weighing only 30 pounds at the time of her death. The autopsy photos were devastating. Emani was literally nothing more than skin and bones, her organs shriveled from starvation. One juror could not even bear to look and turned away in tears. Throughout it all, Tiffany remained unmoved. No emotion, no remorse. The jurors watched her, their sympathy with the victims mounting, but she sat coldly, unflinching. The jury didn't take long to reach a verdict: guilty. On May 1, 2019, Tiffany Moss, 36, stood in court, the judge's words piercing through the silence. She was sentenced to death by lethal injection, marking the first woman in Georgia to receive the death penalty in over 5 years. Her execution date was set between June 7th and 14th, 2019, but like everything in her case, it remained up for appeal. Her family, even those closest to her, did not rally to her side. No outpouring of support. It was as if they too understood the weight of her actions. Tiffany faced the trial alone, and when it was over, She was left to face the consequences alone. While Tiffany has appealed and her execution date continues to shift, she remains the only woman on death row in Georgia. When her time finally comes, she will become the third woman to be executed in Georgia since 1945. Emani's grandmother, Robin, didn't stop at the reforms. She filed a lawsuit against DFCS, claiming they were well aware of the abuse in the Moss household, but did nothing. Unfortunately, there has been no update on whether her lawsuit succeeded or not. As for Emani, he serves his life sentence at Smith State Prison in Glenville, Georgia. He agreed to testify against Tiffany, providing crucial evidence that contributed to her conviction. His life sentence will be a constant reminder of the daughter he failed to protect. Now, as Tiffany awaits her execution, the question remains: would Emani still be alive today if someone had stepped in sooner? If DFCS had acted? If her father had truly seen the signs? If a teacher had pushed harder for answers? We'll never know. What's clear, though, is that this never should have happened. A child begged for help, and the system, those closest to her, failed her. No one stepped up, no one listened, and because of that, Emani is gone. And so, the next time a child whispers a cry for help, we have to listen. Because next time, it might be another Emani, and next time, there might not be a confession. There might not be a way to make it right. Thank you for watching. What do you think? Should more people have been held accountable? Could more have been done to protect Emani? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this case left you shaken, there's more on the channel, stories just as haunting, that need to be heard. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button, and share this video. It's how we keep these stories alive. See you in the next one.